So next up, we have Michael Goldin, and Michael is the director of business for a company called NoiseAware. Now, NoiseAware is a very, very cool, as I would say, bit of technology in terms of detecting noise within short-term rentals. This technology has allowed operators to manage their short-term rentals under better quality, keep noise down through detection monitors. So I'm going to let Michael go into the detail about it, but this is a very, very cool and very, very cool technology, and I love it. So NoiseAware is what it's all about, and I'm going to introduce Michael Goldin, and he is the future of short-term rentals.
I appreciate that, Chris. Jessica, great job. I guess I don't really need much of an intro on NoiseAware. That was spot on, Chris. So we were founded as the result of an Airbnb house party, and it's something that's kind of plagued the industry of short-term rentals for a long time. People not wanting to live next door to a short-term rental, worried about parties being thrown, but it's really more than that. People just don't want to live next to a noisy place. It could be Chris and I, after a few pints, getting too loud in a rental. So it doesn't have to be a full-blown party to be disruptive. So we started about 5 years ago, where it's just a little sensor that detects noise levels similar to how a thermostat reads temperature. And once that temperature gets too hot, we let either the property manager or the guest know. And we can let the guests know through integrations with one of our partners like Jeremy at Breezeway, who I'm sure could touch on it a little bit further. But pleasure to be here. It's an interesting topic. I meet hotels, short-term rentals. It's really kind of the blending of short-term rentals and hotels. It's what I think you'll see the consistent theme of today. And I'll be focusing mostly on the tech landscape. This space, if you really think about short-term rentals, it's as old as time. The first short-term rental was probably a caveman letting some other caveman into his cave. But really kind of the spark of it all was when Airbnb started gaining traction and becoming a verb. And then a lot of technology like NoiseAware has spawned out of that. And Jessica touched on some numbers of pre and post short-term rental data, but the short-term rental landscape is actually 30% more profitable now as of September than it was in September 2019, when I think we were all having record months at that point. So it's only increased as a effect of COVID. Staying in hotels was less of an option for a lot of people. Hotels in some places were required to be closed. So that drove a lot more activity into destination leisure markets and primarily into short-term rentals. So not only has the revenue grown, but so has the revenue per available listing. And similar to the stats Jessica was sharing, the listing prices are going up, largely in part because there's not enough supply to meet the demand. And then also these home prices are going crazy. So they have to hopefully offset some of their costs. So money follows money. And when a sector is having record-breaking years, even during the worst of times with COVID, you see a lot of companies closing funding rounds. NoiseAware was one of them. We raised $8 million in January of this year. Enzo Connect is one of the most recent ones. They raised $2 million last week, I think. Turnover B&B does some cleaning operations. They raised 4.5 in a few months ago. Journey was an operator of short-term rentals, but I think they've realized the tech that they've built can be applicable to everybody, not just themselves. So they raised $9.5 million to fund that transition into being a software provider. Some of you might be familiar with a company called Guesty. They're probably the largest or one of the largest PMSs for short-term rentals. They kind of fall on the later stage. I think that was a Series C, maybe even a Series D. It's also helped lead into some acquisitions for them. And then we've seen a series of SPACs, IPOs, announcements of going public over the past few years. Home2Go is just an example, but really the snowball that started this all was Airbnb going public in November, December last year, gave confidence to lots of investors, and they just are pouring money into the space. So the short-term rental landscape is pretty similar to how the landscape of hotels, but we'll dive into it just a little bit more. In traditional hotels, it's largely institutional investors and then some individuals. In short-term rentals, it's mostly individuals and second homeowners, and then some primary residences as well. Airbnb, was founded as the extra bedroom to rent out, but it's maybe 10% or less of their platform today. What we're seeing, which is really interesting, and Jessica touched on it, is the amount of money getting poured into second homes. And there are some big institutional investors out there that are dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into buying it, which is great to meet the supply. It also creates challenges in local markets where regulations, where residents don't want to live in a community that's just for short-term rentals, and they want people to own it and be invested in the community. And there's a little bit of friction going on right now between institutional investors dumping lots of money into certain markets and how those markets react to it. Similar to hotels, there are operating companies. They may or may not be flags, but they run the operations primarily for the second homeowners and individual investors. And Jessica touched on Vacasa. They're the largest in the US. They've got 35,000 homes. They're in, call it 100 markets. That's a total guess, but they're in a lot of markets focused mostly on beach and ski. And then you've got really local operators who only operate in a single market, but they've been there for 20 years. They know everything about the market. They know all the owners, all the businesses. You've got big brands like Sonder and a few others, Sexton, Menthouse, Vector, that operate strictly urban units. So New York, Miami, Nashville, cities like that are doing multifamily, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and they're all kind of shifting more towards apart hotels. It started out of taking some vacant units in these multifamily buildings, but what it's more or less evolving to is a straight up apartment hotel. Then you've got flexible rentals, and Central, Orion House are two examples. Nido was another one a while back, where they're long-term resident buildings, but if I go out of town, I can drop my keys off at the front desk. They can put it on Airbnb and offset some of my rent. So I can now live in a better place in a more central location that has higher rents, so long as I go out of town a few times a month. And then the biggest market still is the self-managers. So I own a second home, I manage it myself. I don't, let Vacasa or Southern Comfort or Sonder manage it for 20 to 30% of revenue. It's a lot of work. Some people love doing it. Some people buy a house, do it themselves, and then end up tossing it over to a property manager to handle for them. I'll skip the traveler segment, but it's pretty much the same, with probably a little bit more emphasis on midterm extended stay. I saw a question come in a second ago. In short-term rentals, we call longer stays 28 days or more, 30 days plus. Every segment classifies it a little bit differently, but Jessica may even have a different definition than I do. OTAs, we've all heard of Airbnb. obviously booking Verbo, and then there's the folks bringing us all together at Bidroom, HomeToGo, Holiday, Hopper. These are just examples. There's dozens of them. Flipkey, TripAdvisor, but the big three in short-term rentals are up here at the top. You don't see a whole lot of crossover from hotels onto Airbnb or hotels onto Verbo. Obviously, Booking is a massive platform that blends them all, but Verbo and Airbnb are trying really to separate the type of stays, so you know you're getting a rental or you know you're getting a hotel. Moving into the technology, pretty similar tech stacks in category, but obviously they're all customized. From a property management system, there's only a couple that bleed back and forth from hotels and short-term rentals. Muse, off the top of my head, is one of them that does it, Cloudbeds as well. But there's a ton of PMSs in the space that are going after the short-term rentals. You also have channel managers. We do too. There's operations platforms. Breezeway, Jeremy's on the call. You'll hear more from him in a second, but they're the leader in back of office operations, cleaning, maintenance, guest messaging, making sure everything aside from the listing and the PMS is in order. Dynamic pricing companies, you guys have that as well. Data companies, similar. Access, and we'll jump into this in a slide or two, but there's no front desks in short-term rentals. If there are, it's time that they adapt because there's not many of them left. The guests get a check-in code. They walk to the door when check-in time starts, and they walk straight in. There's no waiting in line. There's no, keys that don't work, little key fobs or whatever. So I think this is a segment that will continue to see growing, and we've already seen it be adopted pretty quickly in hotels, especially as a result of COVID and people not wanting to stand in lobbies and stand in lines. Probably the biggest differences of stacks or services come from the managed services. You have to have a specific type of insurance to rent out your second home. So there's some great insurance providers out there that are short-term rental specific, covering that second home, not as a primary residence. In order to grow, you're not working with, in most cases, with big institutional investors. So you have to have a good strategy on how to find those single owners and sell them on using your property management service. And Ventory is one that does that really well. There's automated pricing, and then there's manual outsourced pricing, and that's what Rented does. And then there's a lot of M&A activity going on in the space. So guys like Simon Lehman are out there helping advise companies on who to buy, who to sell. But this space needs a lot of consolidation. We'll get into why in a second, but it's good that those folks are out there. And kind of the theme of what we started out today, hotels and short-term rentals are kind of blending pretty seamlessly and at an accelerated rate over the past couple of years. Sonder is a perfect example. I think if you asked them, they would call themselves a hotel, but my definition, my line of delineation is, does it have a kitchen and a bedroom door? If it does, then it's probably more a short-term rental than it is a hotel. But a lot of Sonders do have a check-in desk. You can walk up to, it's got a logo on the building or on the property. Lifehouse is a good example of a hotel that is very tech forward. So they've learned a lot about how short-term rentals can be human capital light and tech heavy. And they're able to reduce headcounts and overhead on the property by like 50, 60% by leveraging more technology. So tech spend is higher, overhead headcount is a little bit lower, And ultimately, that's better profits for the hotel owner. And a good example of how this has been around for many, many years, the W. One of my favorite hotel brands. They've got awesome residences, and their hotels, sometimes they're blended buildings, sometimes they aren't, but it's been around for a long time. People want to stay in a place with a bedroom door. I have a 2-year-old kid. He goes to bed at 7:30. If we're in a hotel room, you're just kind of stuck in your hotel and not able to be on the phone or watch TV or whatever. So having a bedroom door simply is a must-have when I travel for families. So I prefer short-term rentals. But when I travel for work and it's 1 or 2 nights and I'm not spending much time at all in the unit, a hotel is an easier, better experience. So it really all depends on the traveler demographic. Focusrite put out some data that they anticipate in the next couple of years for the levels of transition from short-term rentals to hotels to kind of plateau. But short-term rentals have eaten into hotel stays by about 23-24%. So it all depends on the traveler profile and why they're traveling. But hospitality has been blended for a while and will continue to blend as brands like Sonder and Lifehouse lead the way. Now, the more properties or doors, keys, whatever you want to call it, that you manage, the more software that is typically used. So those single owners that manage 1 to 9 units are still using 2.8 pieces of software. Usually it's a PMS, and oftentimes it's NoiseAware. But as you scale up, then you add in dynamic pricing, you add in operations like Breezeway, and then you can scale up even further and add in layers of insurance and layers of there's endless amounts of technology that you can continue to add. But the need for more software goes up as you manage more units. It's harder and harder to do certain things like revenue management for 100 units, whereas for a single unit, you can kind of keep an eye on it every day. And this might be an eye-watering number for hoteliers, but the average short-term rental company spends $51 per door on software. This was a stat that came out of Hostfully's annual survey, and they put one out every year. So I'd advise taking a look at that. But it's not cheap to run the best-in-class softwares in short-term rentals. Now, that said, the average ADR is significantly higher in leisure short-term rentals than it is in hotels. So there's a little bit more money to play with, but at the same time, it's not cheap to make sure you've got your property humming on all fronts. And then to dive in more on how short-term rental tech is bleeding into hospitality, we touched on Operto and keyless entry. I've stayed in one hotel in the past couple of years that I got sent my door number and my keypad, my key code, how to get in, without having to go to the front desk, without having to check in. Come 2 o'clock, I get my email, I can walk in at 3 o'clock or after. And it's a good experience, especially if you're traveling long distances and you're either really tired, you don't want to talk to anybody, you smell, whatever. It's good just to be able to go straight to your room. And we've seen a quick adoption, increased adoption of virtual check-ins in hotels. And virtual concierge, it's another kind of piece that you can peel off of a headcount and put towards technology. Companies like Hostfully have great guidebooks that can be customized for your property, for your area, for your neighborhood. Being able to monitor your units if you have fewer headcount on site is important. And you want to make sure people aren't disturbing other guests in the property or potentially causing damage to your unit. So hotels have started adopting NoiseAware. And then operations wise, we've all seen those housekeepers walking around with a piece of paper and a pen, just checking off units and seeing what's occupied and what's not. There's an easier way to do it. And BreezeAway is a great example of technology coming out of short-term rentals being applied to hotels. So what is next for us in short-term rental tech? The great thing is there's so much technology that pretty much all of your problems can be solved. The challenge is piecing them all together. And to give more color on that, Opera alone has more hotel rooms than the top 10 short-term rental PMSs combined. It's not even close how many PMSs there are out there in hotels versus short-term rentals. I heard BookingPal say the other day that they integrate with 80 different PMSs. Companies like NoiseAware, we've got 8 developers. We can't pump out 80 integrations, right, in any reasonable time frame. So the industry has to get better at figuring out how to work together. We team up with BreezeAway, like I've mentioned a few times, and they've unlocked a lot of capability for us through a single API, which is what the industry needs more of. But you can literally have a team of 20 people just focusing on integrations and not get them all done in short-term rentals in time. So, or in a reasonable time frame. So hope that gives you guys a little bit more insight into the technology landscape. It's growing, it's changing, it's getting better every single day. But I guess we can save questions for the end.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was very, very interesting indeed. So we are going to have questions at the end, but I just wanted to, from listening to your presentation, I think VC investment and tech seem to be very, very interesting in this space. So I think there's a couple of questions that have come out of your presentation that we'll get into in the Q&A, but certainly the VC is really interesting. It's showing, the potential in the industry, but also the tech side of it. And I think there's a lot of the tech that hotels could tap into that can actually benefit them in terms of, revenue saving, in terms of time saving. And I think that's going to be really interesting to get into in the Q&A. So thank you so much, Michael. Great presentation. And I'm sure that's brought a lot of people a lot of value.